Yeah, so as everyone's aware by this point, we have a pretty rigorous or multi-phase editing process, right? It's pretty lengthy compared to, in my opinion, other newsrooms in my experience. So every single article goes through 3 rounds of edits, as you've already been, familiarized with. The primary editor of an article is as the name implies, is the main editor that is assigned to a piece and is responsible not only for editing the writer's first draft, but also guiding the writer through the remaining process. The primary editor is also responsible for serving as a point of contact for the story, um, and the managing editor many times like could jump in just to check in with the primary editor to make sure that everything is timely, and that just to see if anything has come up that we should be aware of. um, the primary editor should be checking in regularly, with the writer, and should be updating the flow in the Airtable as much as you can. Every time there is a new development, just try to keep everyone updated by updating the flow. So in this slide, there are some questions that you should be asking, or having a conversation about with the writer when they first submit their first draft. Is it sufficiently reported? Many times after you read the first draft, you might realize that maybe there aren't enough community voices, or maybe we're lacking the perspective of a public official or an expert. However we define an expert, an expert could be a university professor. It could be um, someone at a local nonprofit organization. Could be clergy or ministers, or religious leaders. Um, it could be, really, it runs the gamut. Um, but somebody who is obviously knowledgeable about the topic, and it's and I in my opinion, it's important for experts to have a stake in the issue, but not always. If as long as the subject understands the issue well, even if they're removed from the situation, but if they have some type of expertise, or other kind of background knowledge that could provide some insight to the piece, that's just something to always keep in mind. Another question is, is the first draft focused, concise and well structured? The first paragraph is always, as you all know, very important, because that's what's going to attract the attention of the reader. And many times the first paragraph kind of helps the reader define whether they're going to keep reading, or whether, this is as far as they're going to go. Um, so it's important that for the lead to be solid. Um, the lead essentially talks about what the rest of the story is going to be about, and the nut graph essentially explains why we should care. Why is this even important in the first place? Um, Another question is the journalism ethically sound? This is a more complicated question, but obviously you want to make sure that the piece is reflecting um, the community that it's in, or that it mostly affects. So you definitely want to obtain your sources from the local community. Um, you want to be honest. You don't want to be making up quotes, right? I don't think I really need to go too much into this. We all know what I think good ethics are supposed to look like. Does the story get to the most important aspects of the topic? Like, are you covering all your bases? And obviously, does it use correct grammar, punctuation, and style? Though one thing I do tell editors is that in the first draft, don't worry too much about the punctuation and style because that could come later. You want to focus on the content, um, and you want to determine early on whether the story needs additional reporting, or if it's good enough for you to take first edits and then send it to seconds. Um, what should I add to this? So at this point, if you were to open, the Airtable, you should already have, the name, or the potential name of what the article would be, in the Airtable. Um, you would have the name of the writer or producer, and then you would also have the name of the primary editor in the Airtable. So at the very least, you'll have those three pieces of information that everybody else can see. I don't know if I forgot anything. Feel free to add anything, Martha, about primary edits.
Well,
Um,
just to note, there's a whole section where we go way more in depth about primary edits. This is
Okay, feel free to go to the next slide. But go ahead, Martha.
well, I was just going to say that the writer's guide that's linked out here is kind of goes into all of this like in much more detail. And I have been an editor for a really long time, and I was just reading it the other day, and I was like, oh, this is really good. It's actually very helpful to just continue to refresh your touch base with the basics, the basic standards of what you're trying to do. So I was like, oh yeah, this is good. So I would highly encourage you to check that out. Oh, there we go. Do you want me to take? I can do this one.
Cool.
So the second editor, basically, again, once the piece, you've determined that the piece is kind of ready to go into the production pipeline, you send it to a second editor, and the second editor reads it for all these elements, grammar, style, flow, and readability, just sort of tone. I always find it helpful as an editor to correct or flag really obvious fact checking things that even though it's also going to be sent to a fact checker at the same time, it cannot hurt. Like if you know that someone's name is spelled with a Y instead of an IE, and it's wrong in there, just put a note. Fact checking should not be the burden of just the fact checker. And then the second editor basically reads it, and they're allowed to ask whatever questions they want. Like they're really the second set of eyes. So if they read it and they're like, I don't know, I feel like the lead is actually kind of fuzzy, and they can make substantive comments. The second editor makes all of their comments and I'm sure you're all familiar with Google Docs, but you do all of this in the suggesting mode in Google Docs so that you can see all the track changes. And then when you're done, you send it back to the primary editor, and the primary editor and the writer will work together to resolve whatever notes that the second editor has made on the document, basically. Fact checking. Like I said, these are all the things that the fact checker, who will be looking at we do the fact checking on a parallel copy of the document. So the fact checking doesn't happen on the live document that you are editing. We make a copy, the fact checker takes it, they mark it up, they have their whole system for that. And we will have a workshop on how that whole process works. But these are some of the basic things that should be fact checked in every story. All names and titles of people, of institutions, schools, buildings, works of art, books, magazines, documents, reports, anything that's a proper noun, occupational titles, such and such. It says Jason Schumer, managing editor of Southside Weekly. And you're like, wait a minute, Jason's the managing director. You're going to change that, right? The quotes, the fact checker will check the quotes, any quotes in the story against the transcripts and audio or print transcripts that the reporter has provided. Fact checkers will double check the math if there's math in the story. You make sure that it's done correctly. Make sure the quotes are attributed to the right people. Fact check addresses. This comes up sometimes. Somebody will accidentally put North Ashland Avenue instead of South Ashland Avenue in their story, and you read right over it if you're not thinking about it. So make sure that the addresses are correct. Any kind of like publicly accessible historical facts about, the sorry, I can't even think of when was the Great Chicago Fire? 1891.
1871.
Thank you, 1870, right, 150 years ago. If you says the Great Chicago Fire was in 1873, you're like, wait a minute, that's not right. Fix that. And just any kind of sweeping general claims that the writer is making. This is all stuff that, again, we have a very systematized fact-checking process that will be you will love them. And they will back you up on all this stuff, but it can't hurt as the editor to kind of keep all this stuff in mind as you go through the story.
Yeah, I'd like to add something too. Second edits can be as important as first edits, because when you're doing second edits, you'll come across like many times, like after you've read the piece, there are still lingering questions, right? Or maybe things that don't connect or transition well from one paragraph to the next, or there is like a hole in the story that you know you just want it to make sense. So many times when it goes to seconds, you realize that there is actually even like additional reporting that needs to be done. Something that perhaps the first editor didn't catch. Um, but you also don't know like how much the primary editor has already worked with the writer. So it could be that the primary editor already gave all kinds of feedback and did everything that they could, but still by the time that it gets to seconds, the piece still needs work. It does happen, especially when we're on a tight deadline and we're trying to get through things really fast. Once it gets to seconds, don't don't go easy on it. Like if there are things that you need to point out, don't be shy about it. Also about the fact checking process. Uh, um, Sorry, a draft will go to second and fact checking at the same time. Um, so when the primary editor determines that a story is ready to go to seconds, that means that it is also ready to go to fact checking. So on Slack, during production night, or in the production night channel, the primary editor will say or will announce, channel, this draft is ready to send to seconds and FC, which means fact checking. So that happens, at the same time. And in order for a piece to go to fact checking, you have to have, all the materials ready for the fact checker to review. So as a primary editor, you're going to be asking the writer to provide interview recordings or interview transcripts or their interview notes, plus any data that they used that isn't already easily accessible, and any other sources that might be difficult for the fact checker to find on their own, just by doing a Google search. You also want to send them any links that could help them fact check the piece. And all of these materials you would put them all in a folder within the story folder in the drive, if that makes any sense. Yeah, that's all I had to say.
Can I add one more thing? Sorry. We're
Yeah.
probably getting way ahead of the game, but the editing process should really be a conversation, though. Like, it's not like the second editor gets priority over the first editor's edits. Like, if you as the primary editor on the story and the person who is the most familiar with it disagree with a note that the second or third editor is making, you are welcome to disregard it or to push back against it in a respectful fashion, obviously. It would, because ultimately it's up to you. You are the person who has the responsibility for the story. So It's not like me or Jackie's going to come in and give you a bunch of notes, and then you just have to automatically take them if you disagree with them. Okay, go ahead.
That's right. Yeah, and another thing about second and third edits is that yeah, so the editor will leave their suggested comments on the Google Doc, but it should not be the writer who is approving, those suggestions. It should be the primary editor that who goes back to the document and reviews all the suggested edits of the second and third editor and approves or declines those suggestions. Of course, if the second and third editor, if they have questions for the writer, then you want to leave those up for the writer so that the writer can see them and can address those questions.